The Coalition Council chamber was a massive spherical room where representatives from hundreds of species gathered to make decisions that affected the entire galaxy. Tiered seating rose up the curved walls, each delegation positioned according to their species' influence and contribution to the coalition. At the center floated a platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Their words translated simultaneously into thousands of languages. Daehyun and Hijin sat in the human delegation section, surrounded by Earth officers and diplomats who were nervous about the upcoming vote. Most of them did not know about the conspiracy. They only knew that humanity's position in the coalition was about to be challenged, and the outcome could shape Earth's future for generations. Prince Xelian called the assembly to order, his silver form gleaming under the chamber's lights. We gather today to address concerns that have arisen regarding humanity's integration into coalition society. Recent events have demonstrated possible incompatibility between human cultural values and the standards that have maintained coalition unity for millennia. He gestured, and holographic displays appeared showing footage from the ceremony. Daehyun walking past the exceptional candidates, stopping in front of Hijin, making his choice. The images were edited to emphasize the contrast, making Hyejin look as small and inadequate as possible, next to the other candidates' obvious superiority. The human representative was offered a great honor, Xelian continued. A choice that would demonstrate wisdom, strategic thinking, and respect for coalition traditions. Instead, he chose the least qualified candidate, showing either ignorance of our values or deliberate disrespect. This raises questions about whether humanity is ready for positions of greater authority within our alliance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several delegations. Daehyun felt Hyejin tense beside him, but she remained silent as they had planned. To speak on this matter, I call Admiral Taeyang Park, the highest-ranking human officer in coalition service, Xelian announced. Taeyang rose from the human section and moved to the central platform with practiced confidence. He was tall and lean, his uniform perfect, every inch the image of a successful military leader who had adapted to galactic standards. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years earning the respect of non-human species. Thank you, Prince Xelian. I speak today not against humanity, but for our future. I have served the coalition for 15 years, and in that time I have learned what it takes for humans to succeed in galactic society. We must be willing to set aside outdated cultural practices that hold us back. We must embrace efficiency over sentiment, logic over emotion. He turned to look directly at Daehyun. Corporal Kim is a capable soldier. His performance in battle was admirable, but his choice during the ceremony revealed a fundamental weakness in human thinking. When offered excellence, he chose mediocrity. When given an opportunity to demonstrate strategic judgment, he acted on personal feeling. This is the kind of thinking that could endanger coalition operations if humans are given greater command authority. Taeyang's words struck exactly the right tone for the audience. He was not attacking humanity but expressing concern. He was not being emotional but logical. Several delegations nodded in agreement. I propose that humans continue to serve in combat roles where our particular strengths are valuable, but that command positions be limited until we demonstrate greater cultural maturity. This is not punishment. It is prudent recognition of where humanity currently stands in its development. He paused for effect. We cannot let sentiment override the safety of the entire coalition. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species agreed enthusiastically. Others argued against restricting humanity. The human delegation looked devastated, knowing they were watching their influence being systematically dismantled by one of their own. Then Daehyun stood up. I request permission to address the assembly, he said clearly. Xelian looked annoyed but could not refuse without appearing unfair. The corporal may speak. Daehyun moved to the central platform. He was not a politician or diplomat. He was a soldier who had spent the last week uncovering a conspiracy. He looked out at the hundreds of species, gathered in the chamber, and decided to tell them the truth. Admiral Taeyang is correct that I chose based on personal judgment rather than following expected protocol, he began. He's also correct that this reveals something fundamental about human thinking. But he's wrong about what it reveals. He gestured, and Hyejin activated the data files they had prepared. Holographic displays appeared showing the evidence they had gathered. Communication logs between Xelian and Taeyang. Chemical analysis of the poison. medical records showing the intelligence assessments. 6 days ago, someone attempted to assassinate me and 5 other human officers by poisoning our drinks at a diplomatic reception. The poison was siloxane extract, ordered from Earth supplies by someone with high-level credentials. My companion Park Hee-jin, a medical technician that the galaxy considers unexceptional, identified the poison before I drank it. She saved my life and the lives of 5 others. Shocked murmurs spread through the chamber. Taeyang's face remained impassive, but Daehyun saw the calculation in his eyes. The investigation revealed something interesting. Every candidate in the ceremony except Hee-jin had been evaluated for intelligence potential. The ceremony was not just a tradition. It was an operation to place an asset close to me, someone who could monitor and influence Earth's most visible soldier. By choosing Hee-jin, the one person they had not recruited, I accidentally avoided the trap. Daehyun displayed more evidence. The poisoning was designed to create fear and instability, to make it look like humans were being targeted by anti-human factions. Then this assembly would be used to argue that humans needed to be restricted for our own protection. It was carefully planned by Prince Zelian, who wants to reduce human influence to strengthen his own position. He turned to face Taeyang directly, and by Admiral Taeyang Park, who believes humanity's future requires abandoning our cultural identity and becoming copies of other species. Taeyang stepped forward, his voice hard. This is a desperate fabrication by a soldier who knows he damaged Earth's reputation and is trying to deflect blame. Where is your proof that I was involved? The chemical requisition was approved by your office, Hee-jin said, standing up in the human section. The communication logs show coordination with Prince Zelian's staff, and the server who distributed the poison has given testimony that he was paid through accounts traced to your network. Her voice was steady, confident. I may not be a warrior or diplomat, but I know how to follow medical evidence, and the evidence says you tried to kill 7 people to make a political point. Taeyang's mask cracked slightly. You chose weakness over strength, he said to Daehyun, his voice filled with contempt. You chose fat over fitness, sentiment over strategy. You proved that humanity is not ready to lead because we cling to outdated values like compassion and inclusion, when the galaxy respects only capability and power. No, Daehyun said quietly. I proved that humanity has values the galaxy has forgotten. He addressed the entire assembly now, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. Every species I've met judges worth by how close someone comes to an ideal. Strongest, smartest, fastest, most beautiful. You evaluate people like equipment, keeping the best specimens and discarding the rest. That's efficient. That's logical, and it almost cost you this war. He could see he had their attention now, even the hostile delegations. Humans survived on Earth not because we were the strongest species, but because we were the most diverse. We lived in deserts and tundra, mountains and jungles. We had different body types, different abilities, different ways of thinking. When the Ice Age came, we didn't decide who was most fit to survive. We kept everyone because we never knew which adaptation would save us. Daehyun pointed at Hee-jin. She survived 3 weeks in the dark because her body stores fat efficiently, an adaptation from years of scarcity. In Admiral Taeyang's perfect military, she would be rejected as inefficient. But when the Void Swarm came to her colony, she lived and your perfect soldiers died. That's humanity. We don't just keep the ideal specimens. We keep everyone because we never know which so-called imperfection will save us next. He turned back to Taeyang. You spent so long trying to be like them that you forgot what made us worth joining this coalition in the first place. You forgot that humans are dangerous not because we're the strongest, but because we refuse to abandon anyone. Because we'll hold impossible positions for 18 hours to save refugees we've never met. Because we'll choose the person everyone else rejected and trust them to save our lives. The chamber was silent now. Every eye was on the 2 humans facing each other on the central platform. You're right that I chose based on emotion, Daehyun continued. Specifically empathy, the ability to recognize another person's humanity, even when everyone else has decided they have no value. That's not weakness. That's the only reason humanity survived long enough to reach the stars. And if the coalition can't understand that, then maybe we don't belong here. Archon Velis stood up from the Silvari delegation, her silver face unreadable. These are serious accusations, Corporal. The diplomatic reception was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of coalition officers and planetary representatives to honor the victory over the Void Swarm. Daehyun had been required to attend, and Hyejin had insisted on coming with him rather than hiding in their quarters. They moved through the crowd together, enduring stares and whispered comments. The human who chose poorly, someone murmured in Thailand as they passed. Daehyun did not react, but he felt Hyejin's hand tighten on his arm. A server approached with a tray of drinks, the traditional Sylvari greeting ceremony. Daehyun took a glass of pale blue liquid, the ceremonial toast that every guest was expected to accept. The server moved on before offering one to Hyejin, a subtle insult that she was not worth acknowledging. Daehyun raised the glass to his lips, and Hyejin suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Don't drink that," she said urgently. "What?" She pulled his hand down and leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "The smell is wrong. That's not pure ceremonial wine. There's something else in it." Daehyun looked at the glass more carefully. To his eyes, it looked normal. "Are you sure?" "I'm a medical technician. I spent 3 years learning to identify compounds by scent and appearance. That drink has been contaminated with something." Her eyes were sharp now, focused in a way he had not seen before. "We need to get it tested without causing a scene." They moved to a quiet corner of the hall, and Hyejin produced a small medical scanner from her bag, the kind technicians carried for emergency field analysis. She passed it over the drink while pretending to adjust her clothes, and her face went white. "Siloxane extract," she breathed. "It's a slow-acting poison, harmless to most species but deadly to humans. It would have looked like a natural heart failure in a few hours. No one would have suspected anything." Daehyun felt ice in his veins. Someone had just tried to kill him in the middle of a coalition celebration. Surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, that meant either incredible boldness or careful planning. "Who served the drinks?" he asked. Hyejin's eyes scanned the room. "There, the server in the silver uniform." "But Daehyun, look at the pattern. He's only serving certain guests. All of them human or human-friendly species. This might not be just about you." They watched for 10 more minutes, documenting what they could with Hyejin's medical scanner. The server distributed 6 more contaminated drinks before disappearing into a service corridor. 3 of the recipients were human officers. 2 were diplomats from species that had formed close alliances with Earth. 1 was a Krylon general who had publicly praised human combat tactics. "This is an assassination attempt on multiple targets," Hyejin said. "We need to warn them, and we need to report this to security." They did both. Within an hour, the 6 drinks had been quietly confiscated, and medical teams had administered preventive treatments to the targets. Coalition security began investigating, but their response was oddly slow and bureaucratic. Forms to fill out, questions about whether Hyejin's scanner had been properly calibrated, suggestions that perhaps the contamination was accidental, a mixing error in the kitchens. Back in their quarters that night, Daehyun and Hyejin reviewed what had happened. Something did not add up. "They're not taking this seriously," Hyejin said. "Security should have locked down the entire ship. They should be interrogating everyone who had access to those drinks. Instead, they're treating it like a minor incident." "Unless they already know who did it," Daehyun said slowly, "or unless someone in security is involved." The next morning, Hyejin requested access to the medical records of the ceremony participants, claiming she needed to verify compatibility data for her ongoing treatment protocols as Daehyun's assigned companion. It was a thin excuse, but medical staff had surprising access to information that others could not easily obtain. She was looking for something specific, some clue about who might want multiple human-friendly officers dead. What she found was more disturbing than poison. Hidden in the medical files was a secondary set of data, encrypted but not well enough. Psychological profiles of all 10 ceremony candidates, including detailed assessments of their loyalty, their political leanings, and their potential usefulness as intelligence assets. "They weren't just honoring you," Hyejin said, staring at the data. "Every single candidate except me had been evaluated for intelligence potential. The diplomat, the warrior, the scientist, all of them had been assessed for their ability to gather information or influence coalition politics. You were supposed to choose someone they had already recruited. And by choosing you, I accidentally avoided picking up a handler," Daehyun finished. "That's why Velis was so angry. I wasn't just breaking tradition, I was ruining an intelligence operation. But who's running the operation, and who benefits from killing human officers?" They spent the next 2 days investigating carefully, using Hyejin's medical access and Daehyun's military clearance to piece together information. What emerged was a picture of two separate conspiracies that had merged into one dangerous alliance. The first conspirator was Prince Zelian, Archon Velis's primary rival for control of the Sylvari Empire. He saw humanity as a threat to traditional Sylvari dominance in the coalition. If he could prove that humans were unreliable or caused instability, he could push for reduced human influence and strengthen his own political position. The poisoning attempt was designed to look like human officers were being targeted by anti-human factions, creating fear and division. But Zelian could not have acted alone. He had an ally inside Earth's own command structure. The second conspirator was Admiral Taeyang Park, one of the highest-ranking human officers in coalition service. His message after the ceremony had been harsh, but now Daehyun understood why. Taeyang believed that humanity's future depended on abandoning what he called weak human sentimentality and adopting the efficiency and hierarchy of successful galactic species. Hyejin found the evidence in medical requisition logs. Someone with high-level Earth credentials had ordered Siloxian extract 3 days before the ceremony, claiming it was for xenobiological research. The requisition had been approved by Admiral Taeyang's office. "He's the one who arranged the poison," Hyejin said, her voice shaking. A human admiral tried to kill other humans to prove a point about strength and weakness. "Not just any humans," Daehyun said, reviewing the target list. "Look at who they chose. Officers who advocated for Earth maintaining its cultural identity. Diplomats who pushed back against complete integration into coalition society. And me after I chose you instead of playing their game. They're trying to eliminate anyone who represents human independence." "We need to expose them," Hyejin said. "But we need proof that will hold up in front of the entire coalition. Right now, all we have is circumstantial evidence and medical records that I technically obtained through deception." Daehyun thought about the problem. Taeyang was powerful, connected, and respected. Zelian was Sylvari royalty. Accusing them without ironclad proof would destroy Earth's credibility more effectively than any poison. "We need them to reveal themselves," he said finally. "We need to make them act openly where everyone can see. How do we do that?" "By being exactly what they fear most," Daehyun said. "By showing the coalition what humanity really means, not the version Taeyang wants to present." Over the next 3 days, they carefully built their case while appearing to simply adjust to their new situation. Hyejin used her medical access to document every suspicious communication, every irregular supply request, every small piece of evidence that pointed to the conspiracy. Daehyun reached out to the other officers who had been targeted, quietly sharing information and building a network of people who understood something was wrong. The breakthrough came when Hyejin discovered that Prince Zelian had scheduled a formal assembly of the Coalition Council. The agenda: a vote on limiting human participation in coalition military command, based on concerns about cultural compatibility and reliability. "That's where they'll make their move," Daehyun said. "Taeyang will testify that humans need to change, to become more like the other species. Zelian will use that to push through restrictions on human authority. They'll point to me as an example of human irrationality, choosing emotion over logic. Then we need to be there," Hyejin said. "And we need to turn their own trap against them." "Can you get hard evidence before the assembly? Something that proves the conspiracy?" Hyejin smiled grimly. "I'm a medical technician who survived 3 weeks alone in the dark. I know how to find things people want hidden." She spent the next 48 hours barely sleeping, tracking down every piece of evidence they needed. Communication logs showing coordination between Zelian and Taeyang. Chemical analysis proving the poison came from Earth supplies. Testimony from the server who had been paid to distribute the contaminated drinks. Medical records showing the intelligence assessments of the ceremony candidates. On the morning of the assembly, they had everything they needed. Now they just had to survive long enough to present it. The quarters they assigned to Daehyun and Hyejin were luxurious by military standards. A suite with separate sleeping areas and a common space that looked out over the fleet through massive windows. Neither of them cared about the view. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the weight of the ceremony still heavy between them. "You should have chosen the diplomat," Hyejin said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "or the warrior, or literally anyone else. Do you know what they're saying about us?" Daehyun sat down heavily on one of the chairs. His body was still recovering from the battle, and the ceremony had drained what little energy he had left. I can imagine. Does it matter? Of course it matters. Heejin paced the room, her borrowed clothes rustling. They think you chose me as some kind of joke. Or worse, as an insult to the entire ceremony. The news feeds are already calling it a scandal. They're analyzing your choice like it's some kind of strategic move. Some of them think you're mocking human standards of beauty. Others think you're trying to make a political statement about Earth rejecting coalition values. Maybe I am rejecting their values, Daehyun said quietly. Heejin stopped pacing and stared at him. What does that mean? It means I'm tired of people being treated like objects to be evaluated and selected based on their usefulness. You want to know why I really chose you? He met her eyes. Because you were the only person on that platform who looked as trapped as I felt. Everyone else had accepted it, had convinced themselves it was an honor. You were the only one who knew it was wrong. For a long moment, Heejin said nothing. Then she sat down on the chair across from him, her anger deflating into exhaustion. You don't know anything about me. No, he agreed. So tell me, if we're stuck in this situation, we might as well be honest with each other. She was quiet for a while, staring out the window at the stars. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I grew up on New Jeju. My parents were farmers, part of the second wave of colonists. It was hard at first. The soil wasn't right, the climate was harsher than they expected. We went through 2 years of bad harvests. There were times when we didn't have enough food. She touched her stomach unconsciously. My body learned to hold on to everything. When things got better, my body didn't forget those hungry years. It kept storing fat, preparing for the next famine. That's a survival adaptation, Daehyun said. Nothing to be ashamed of. Try telling that to galactic society, Heejin said bitterly. Most species evolved in consistent environments. They don't understand bodies that adapt this way. To them, I'm just inefficient. Carrying unnecessary weight. A waste of resources. She looked at him. I became a medical technician because I was good with my hands and I liked helping people. I wasn't trying to be exceptional. I just wanted a quiet life on my colony. What happened when the void swarm came? Her face went pale. I was at the medical center when the attack started. The building collapsed. I was trapped in a storage basement for 3 weeks. No light, limited water, some medical supplies, but almost no food. Her voice became mechanical, as if she was reading a report. I survived by rationing 6 nutrient bars across 21 days. I treated my own injuries with whatever I could find. When the coalition forces finally dug me out, I weighed 15 kilos less than when I went in, and I still looked fat to them. Daehyun felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. And they put you in that ceremony. They needed a human representative. Most of the survivors from New Jeju were children or elderly. I was one of the few young adults left. She laughed without humor. They cleaned me up, gave me those clothes, told me it was a great honor. Then they paraded me in front of the galaxy next to females who were perfect by every measure their species values. I knew what I looked like standing there. I knew what people were thinking. You survived 3 weeks alone in the dark, Daehyun said. That's not nothing. It's not exceptional either. I just hid and waited. I didn't save anyone. I didn't do anything heroic. She looked at him directly. Unlike you, who held a position alone for 18 hours against an army. You're an actual hero. I'm just someone who got lucky and didn't die. You want to know something? Daehyun leaned forward. I'm not a hero either. I held that position because I was too stubborn to retreat and too tired to think straight. I didn't make some noble decision to sacrifice myself. I just kept shooting because that's what I was trained to do, and when they told me to fall back, I was too angry to listen. That's not heroism, that's just refusing to quit. Yejin studied him with new eyes. But you saved all those people. Yeah, and you survived when 90% of your colony died. We both did what we had to do. Neither of us asked to be put on display for it. He stood up and walked to the window. The difference is they decided my stubbornness was valuable and your survival wasn't. That's what I rejected when I chose you. The idea that value is measured by what someone else decides is exceptional. They were interrupted by a chime at the door. An aide entered with a data tablet, looking nervous. Corporal Kim, you have messages from Coalition High Command. They're requesting statements about your choice. There are also media requests and several diplomatic inquiries from Earth representatives. Daehyun took the tablet and skimmed through the messages. Most were politely worded demands for explanation. A few were openly hostile, accusing him of damaging human coalition relations. One message from an Earth admiral named Taeyang Park particularly stood out for its harsh tone, calling the choice an embarrassment to humanity's image. "Tell them all I have no statement at this time," Daehyun said, handing back the tablet. The aide hesitated. "Sir, Archon Velis specifically requested a private meeting with you. She says it's urgent." "Fine, when?" "She's waiting now, sir." Daehyun glanced at Hyejin, who shrugged. "Go. I'll be here, apparently living my new life as the galaxy's worst prize." The meeting with Velis took place in a small conference room. Just the two of them and the Archon's personal guard standing by the door. The silvery leader's silver face was composed, but Daehyun could sense the displeasure beneath her diplomatic mask. "I will be direct, Corporal," Velis said. "Your choice has created complications. Several coalition members are questioning whether humanity understands the significance of our traditions. Some are suggesting that Earth is not culturally ready for deeper integration into coalition society." "With respect, Archon, maybe they're right," Daehyun said. "Maybe humans see things differently." "Differently?" Velis's eyes narrowed. "You chose the weakest candidate, the one with no exceptional qualities. In any other species evaluation, she would not have even been included in the selection. I included her only as a courtesy to Earth to ensure human representation. And you chose her. Why?" "Because she's a person, not a trophy," Daehyun said flatly. "Because your tradition of rewarding warriors with people is something humans left behind a long time ago. And the only reason I participated was because you made it clear that refusing would hurt Earth's position in the coalition." Velis stood abruptly. "You speak of leaving traditions behind, yet humanity is barely 20 years into galactic society. The Sylvari have maintained order and prosperity for 10,000 years. Perhaps you should consider that our ways have succeeded where others have failed. Your ways almost lost this war," Daehyun said quietly. "You were losing until humanity showed up with our chaotic, inefficient, stubborn way of fighting. Maybe success isn't measured by how long you've been in power." For a moment he thought Velis might call her guards. Then she sat back down, and when she spoke, her voice was colder. "You have made your position clear, Corporal. I suggest you be very careful in the coming days. The galaxy is watching humanity, and you have become the symbol of your species' place in the coalition. Do not squander that." It was a threat wrapped in diplomatic language. Daehyun recognized it for what it was. When he returned to their quarters, Hyejin was staring at the news feeds on a wall display. Her face was pale. "We have a problem," she said. "A big one." The first candidate stood with perfect posture, her crystalline form catching the light and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the platform. She was Luminari, a species known for their diplomatic skills and mental abilities. Her name was announced as Crystallis, and she had served as a mediator during the evacuation, saving hundreds through her negotiation skills. She looked at Daehyun with calm confidence, already certain of her value. The second was a Krylon warrior named Thoraxis, her dark exoskeleton polished to perfection. She had killed 23 Void Swarm soldiers in personal combat. Her forearms were decorated with honor markings, and she stood like a statue carved from stone. When their eyes met, hers held a challenge, as if daring him to choose strength. The third was a Thaylan scientist named Kira. Her species was known for exceptional intelligence, and she had helped develop the shield modifications that protected the evacuation ships. Her forearms held data tablets even now, her mind clearly elsewhere. She looked at Daehyun with analytical interest, as if he were a puzzle to solve. The presentations continued. Each female was exceptional in some way, each a master of their craft or gifted with abilities that made them valuable to galactic society. The crowd murmured approval at each introduction, discussing their merits, placing bets on which the human would choose. The ninth candidate was announced, a graceful Sylvari named Eliana, who moved like flowing water and had composed a symphony that boosted coalition morale during the darkest days of the battle. She smiled at Daehyun with practiced elegance. Then came the 10th, and the murmuring in the crowd changed tone. Some beings laughed quietly. Others whispered in confusion. Her name was Hyejin Park. She was human from the colony of New Jeju. Unlike the others, she wore simple clothes that looked borrowed, not properly fitted. Unlike the others, her body did not conform to the lean, efficient forms that most galactic species valued. She was soft and rounded, what humans called overweight, her face flushed with obvious embarrassment. She did not stand with confidence like the warrior or grace like the diplomat. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, eyes fixed on the floor, clearly wishing she could be anywhere else. There was no introduction of her achievements because she had none worth mentioning by galactic standards. She was a medical technician, nothing more. She had survived the attack on New Jeju by hiding in a storage facility for 3 weeks, while the Void Swarm slaughtered her friends and family. Daehyun saw how the other candidates looked at her. Thoraxis barely glanced her way, dismissing her immediately. Crystalis studied her with something like pity. Quira seemed puzzled by her inclusion, as if it made no logical sense. Archon Velis spoke from her position beside the platform, her voice carrying across the hall. Corporal Kim, these 10 individuals represent the finest qualities of coalition society. Each has been chosen for their exceptional abilities and their potential to support a warrior of your caliber. The choice is yours, and your decision will be honored and respected. It was a script, Daehyun realized. Every word carefully chosen to reinforce the idea that this was about capability and value, about selecting the best possible partner based on logical criteria. The crowd waited, expecting him to walk down the line, to ask questions perhaps, to make a show of considering each option before selecting the obvious choice. He did walk down the line, but he did not ask questions. He looked at each person, and what he saw made him increasingly uncomfortable. Crystalis had the smile of someone who had been coached on proper responses. Thoraxis stood like she was at an inspection. Kira kept glancing at her data tablets. None of them wanted to be here, but they had accepted it because refusing would damage their own standing in galactic society. They were performing, playing roles assigned to them, all except Hyejin, who had given up even trying to pretend. She looked miserable, standing at the end of the line like an afterthought. Her breathing was shallow, and Daehyun recognized the signs of a panic attack being barely held in check. She was terrified not of him specifically, but of the entire situation, of being displayed like an object in front of thousands of beings who had already decided she was not good enough. Daehyun stopped in front of her. She did not look up. Up close he could see that her clothes were definitely borrowed, probably given to her that morning. He could see the signs of recent malnourishment, the way her body had stored every bit of nutrition it could during her 3 weeks of hiding. He could see the trembling in her hands. "Look at me," he said quietly, speaking in Korean, a language he had not used in months. Hyejin's eyes snapped up, startled to hear her native language. Her eyes were dark and frightened, but there was something else there too. A spark of anger, perhaps, at being put in this position, a stubborn refusal to completely break down despite everything. "What's your name?" he asked, even though he had heard the announcement. "Hyejin," she whispered in Korean. "Park Hyejin. Did you volunteer for this, Hyejin?" She shook her head slightly. "They said they needed a human representative. I was one of the only survivors. They said refusing would insult the coalition." "Same thing they told me," Daehyun said. He saw the surprise flash across her face, the realization that he was just as trapped as she was. The crowd was getting restless now. The other candidates were starting to shift, confused by how long he was spending with the obvious reject. Archon Velis's expression remained neutral, but Daehyun could sense her displeasure. He turned back to face the assembled dignitaries and spoke clearly in Standard Galactic, the common language of the coalition. "I have made my choice." The crowd fell silent. Every eye focused on him. The other 9 candidates straightened, preparing for their name to be called. Daehyun reached out and gently took Hyejin's hand. She flinched at the contact, then stared at him in absolute confusion. "I choose Park Hyejin," he said. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then the hall erupted in noise. Gasps, shouts, arguments, confusion. Some beings laughed, thinking it was a joke. Others looked offended, as if he had insulted the entire ceremony. The other candidates stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend why anyone would choose the fat human girl over their obvious superiority. Archon Velis's silver face remained composed, but Daehyun saw the flash of anger in her eyes before she controlled it. She had expected him to choose the Sylvari, or perhaps the diplomat. She had expected him to play the game correctly. "An interesting choice, Corporal," Velis said, her voice carefully neutral. May I ask your reasoning? Dahyun looked at Hyejin, who was still staring at him like he had lost his mind. Then he looked back at the Archon. She's the only one who didn't want to be here, he said simply. The only one who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. That makes her the only honest one. More murmuring from the crowd. Some beings nodded thoughtfully. Others looked disgusted. The ceremony continued with formal words and official declarations, but Dahyun barely heard them. He kept his hand on Hyejin's, feeling her pulse racing with fear and confusion. When it was finally over, when they were dismissed and escorted from the platform, Hyejin pulled her hand free and turned to him. Her fear had transformed into anger. Why did you do that? She demanded in Korean. Do you have any idea what you've just done to both of us? The battle had lasted 3 days and 2 nights. Corporal Dahyun Kim watched from his position as the last Void Swarm ship exploded in the distance, painting the darkness of space with brief orange fire. His hands were still gripping his rifle, knuckles white, body running on nothing but stimulants and pure stubbornness. Around him, the bodies of both allies and enemies lay scattered across the metal corridor he had defended for 18 hours straight. He had not been supposed to hold this position alone. There had been 12 soldiers at the start, a mixed unit from 4 different species. The Krylon warriors had been first to fall, their exoskeletons cracking under sustained plasma fire. The Thalen twins, with their forearms and superior reflexes, had lasted 6 hours before ammunition ran out and they made a desperate charge. The others had died one by one until only Dahyun remained, human and stubborn, refusing to let the Void Swarm through to the civilian evacuation ships behind him. The coalition commanders had ordered him to retreat 5 times. He had ignored them 5 times, not because he was brave, but because he understood something they did not. If he retreated, 40,000 refugees would die in the time it took reinforcements to arrive. So he stayed, and he killed everything that tried to pass, and somehow his merely human body had endured what stronger species could not. Now the battle was over. The Void Swarm was retreating across all fronts. The coalition had won, barely, and High Command needed heroes to show the galaxy that unity and sacrifice still mattered. Dahyun did not feel like a hero. He felt tired. 2 days later, after the medics had pumped him full of healing gel and forced him to sleep for 16 hours, they came for him. A delegation from Coalition High Command, led by a tall Sylvari woman whose skin shimmered like polished silver under the ship's lights. She moved with the grace of someone who had never known real fear, who had been born into power and beauty, and had never questioned either. Her name was Archon Velis, and she was one of the ruling voices of the Sylvari Empire, the species that held the most influence in the coalition. Corporal Kim, she said, her voice musical and precise, the coalition owes you a great debt. Your actions saved thousands of lives and held a critical position that secured our victory in this sector. Dahyun stood at attention in his clean uniform, medals he had not earned yet pinned to his chest by an aide that morning. He said nothing. In his experience, when powerful people thanked you, they usually wanted something. We wish to honor you according to our oldest traditions, Velis continued. As a warrior of exceptional merit, you have earned the right of selection. 10 females from the liberated colonies will be presented to you, and you may choose one as your companion. She will be provided for, honored, and bound to you according to coalition law. This is how the Sylvari have rewarded great warriors for 10,000 years. Dahyun felt his stomach turn. He had heard of this tradition, but had never imagined it would apply to him. The Sylvari saw it as a great honor, a way to ensure their best warriors passed on their strength and were supported by skilled partners. To his human sensibilities, it sounded like buying a person. With respect, Archon, he said carefully, humans don't usually do things this way. Could I refuse without causing offense? Velis's silver eyes studied him, unreadable. You could refuse, she said slowly, but it would be seen as a rejection of coalition unity at a time when we need symbols of cooperation. Other species have begun to question humanity's commitment to our shared cause. Your acceptance would strengthen Earth's position considerably. There it was. The real reason. This was not about honoring him. This was about politics, about Earth's fragile position in a galactic community that still saw humans as primitive newcomers who had only joined the coalition 20 years ago when the Void Swarm threatened their system. Dahyun thought about the men and women back on Earth, the billions counting on humanity to maintain its alliances. He thought about the refugees he had saved, who came from a dozen different worlds and species. He thought about the cost of saying no. "I understand, Archon," he said quietly. "I accept the honor." Velis smiled, satisfied. "The ceremony will be in 3 days. It will be broadcast across Coalition space. You have brought great glory to your species, Corporal. I trust you will continue to do so." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations. Aides tried to coach him on proper behavior, on what qualities he should look for, on the political implications of choosing a female from one species over another. Daehyun ignored most of it. He spent his time reading reports from the battle, learning which colonies had been saved and at what cost. One report mentioned a human colony called New Jeju, a farming world that had been overrun by the Void Swarm for 3 weeks before Coalition forces liberated it. 90% of the population dead or missing, the survivors traumatized, hungry, and broken. Daehyun had never been to New Jeju, but he knew about the colony. It had been settled by Korean immigrants 2 generations ago, people looking for a fresh start away from Earth's overcrowded cities. On the morning of the ceremony, they dressed him in formal uniform, dark and decorated with symbols he did not fully understand. They led him through the massive corridors of the Coalition flagship, past windows showing the vast fleet that orbited the liberated world below. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species, all united against the Void Swarm, all watching to see what the human hero would choose. The ceremony hall was enormous, with crystalline walls that captured and reflected light in strange patterns. Thousands of dignitaries filled the tiered seats, their conversations creating a low murmur that echoed through the space. At the center stood a raised platform, and on that platform waited 10 females of various species. Daehyun walked forward, feeling every eye upon him. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the 10 individuals standing before him, each one forced into this situation just as much as he was. This was not an honor, he realized. This was a test, and everyone was waiting to see if the human would choose correctly. He climbed the steps to the platform, and for the first time, he looked at each person standing there. Really looked at them, not as symbols or political statements, but as individuals who each had their own story, their own reasons for being here. And that was when he saw her.